The suns blazed down on the coppery expanse of Epsilon Tertius, baking the ground into a brittle crust and filling the air with the acrid tang of overheated metal. Jax Arlen adjusted the straps of his scavenger's pack and wiped sweat from his brow, squinting against the glare. This far from the settlement's domes, the terrain was as dangerous as it was hostile. Jagged cliffs, shifting sands, and creatures that could strip flesh from bone faster than a pulse blast. But Jax was determined. He'd tracked a promising mineral vein to this canyon, and with the month's quotas hanging over his head, turning back wasn't an option. The silence was what tipped him off. Normally, the canyon hummed with the distant growls of raptors or the chitter of scavenger birds, but now it was eerily still. Jack slowed his pace, his hand brushing the grip of his plasma cutter. That's when he saw it, half hidden by the twisted remains of what looked like a wrecked shuttle, lying in a shallow depression near the canyon's edge. At first, he thought it was just debris, some chunk of fuselage scorched by re-entry. Then it moved. Jax's pulse quickened as he stepped closer. The creature was massive, at least the size of a hover truck, with a body that seemed to shimmer between fur and scales depending on how the light hit it. Its limbs were long and muscular, ending in sharp talons, and its head had a feline grace, with deep golden eyes that glowed faintly even in the daylight. But it wasn't the size or its alien beauty that froze him in place. It was the blood, dark green, oozing from a long gash along its flank. Its chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath sounding like a struggle. It growled as he approached, a low rumble that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Jax stopped short, hands raised. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you." He wasn't sure what possessed him to talk to it like that. Maybe it was the intelligence in its eyes, or the fact that it hadn't immediately lunged at him. Whatever the reason, he took another cautious step. The creature didn't move to attack, but its gaze locked on him, unblinking. Jax knelt a few feet away, close enough now to see the wound in detail. The edges were jagged, the kind of damage that suggested a plasma weapon rather than claws or teeth. Whatever had happened, the creature had clearly been in a fight and lost. Its golden eyes watched him, its body coiled tight, ready to spring if he made the wrong move. He reached slowly into his pack and pulled out a roll of synth cloth. It was meant for patching up gear, not flesh, but it was all he had. "Okay," he murmured, voice steady despite the thudding in his chest. "Let's see if I can help you." The beast's ears flicked, but it didn't stop him as he tore a strip of cloth and pressed it gently to the wound. Its growl deepened, but when Jax didn't pull away, it quieted again. He worked quickly, securing the makeshift bandage as best he could. The creature's breathing remained labored, but its trembling lessened. Once he finished, Jax sat back on his heels, looking at the creature. "Well, that's the best I can do. You're not going to make it out here on your own." It blinked slowly, almost like it understood. Jax wasn't sure if he was imagining it, or if this creature really was more intelligent than any animal he'd encountered before. He pushed the thought aside. What mattered now was getting it to safety. His speeder was parked a kilometer back, behind a rocky outcrop. It would be a rough trip, but he couldn't just leave the creature here. Strapping together a stretcher from the remains of his equipment frame, he managed, with considerable effort, to get the creature onto it. It let out a soft, pitiful sound as he secured the straps, and Jax felt a pang of guilt. "I know," he said quietly. "Just hold on. I'll get you somewhere safe." As he hauled the stretcher toward the speeder, the creature's golden eyes never left him. The canyon walls echoed with the creak of the frame and the distant whistle of wind through the rocks. Jax couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just saving some wild animal. There was something else at play here, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. But whatever it was, Jax didn't have time to figure it out. All that mattered was getting the creature away from this canyon before nightfall, when the predators came out to hunt. The creature, which Jax had taken to calling Ember, quickly became the centerpiece of his quiet life on Epsilon Tertius. It hadn't been an easy start. At first, Ember had kept its distance, watching him from a shadowed corner of the habitat's main room. Jax didn't press, giving the creature time to adjust, but every day it grew a little bolder. It accepted scraps of processed protein bars and slivers of rehydrated meat. It allowed Jax to clean its wounds without too much fuss. And one evening, it even crept close enough to rest its chin on his knee, its eyes half-lidded with what Jax cautiously interpreted as trust. Ember wasn't like any creature he'd ever encountered. It moved with an unsettling grace, its scales and fur catching the light in a way that made it seem ethereal, as if it belonged to some otherworldly domain. When Jax looked into its golden eyes, he felt a strange pull, an almost magnetic connection. He told himself it was just his imagination, yet the sensation lingered. Over time, Ember's injuries healed at an almost miraculous pace. What should have taken weeks took only days. The deep plasma gash along its side closed up, leaving a faint, silvery line. Singed fur grew back thick and glossy. Jax started to notice other oddities. Ember's intelligence, its ability to understand him on a level that no ordinary animal could. He'd tell it to stay, and it would wait, its eyes following him as if it knew exactly what he meant. When he called it over, it would respond without hesitation. Jax hadn't trained it. Ember simply seemed to comprehend his words, his tone, his intent. At first, Jax told no one about Ember. The mining settlement was a close-knit community, and news of a strange, powerful creature in his home would spread quickly, and not all attention would be welcome. The settlement had its share of opportunists, scavengers, and even a few off-world poachers. The last thing Jax wanted was for someone to come sniffing around, looking to make a quick credit off something as rare and remarkable as Ember. Still, keeping Ember a secret wasn't easy. The creature was growing stronger by the day, and with that strength came a restlessness. It would pace the small habitat, sniffing at the edges of the containment dome, occasionally making low, rumbling sounds that set Jax's nerves on edge. It wasn't aggression. It felt more like frustration or maybe longing. Jax knew Ember wasn't from Epsilon Tertius. The creature must have come from somewhere, but that somewhere was a mystery. When he tried to think back to how he'd found it lying among the wreckage near the canyon, he realized he'd never been able to identify the ship it had been near. It hadn't been one of the standard settlement craft. It hadn't even looked like any known pirate or corporate vessel. Whatever that ship had been, it was gone now, its remains scavenged by the settlement's more enterprising individuals. The only trace of its existence was the creature it had left behind. Ember's presence began to change Jax's routine. He spent more time at home, talking to the creature, watching it, trying to understand it. He began reading up on xenobiology, though the settlement's small library had little to offer on species from outside the known systems. Still, he did his best, learning what he could about non-terrestrial anatomy and diet. Ember seemed to appreciate the effort. It started following him around the habitat, sitting beside him while he ate, watching as he worked on repairing mining tools. On a particularly quiet evening, Jax tried sketching it, using a charred stick and a scrap of paper. Ember tilted its head, studying the crude drawing with what almost seemed like amusement. Jax laughed. "What do you think, huh? Not bad for a miner with no artistic talent." Ember's ears flicked, and it nudged his hand, nearly knocking the stick out of his fingers. Jax took it as a sign of approval. Despite the growing bond, Jax couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He didn't know where Ember had come from, who, if anyone, had sent it, or what its presence might mean. For all he knew, It could have been an experiment gone wrong, an escaped lab specimen, or even a bioengineered weapon. The more he looked into those intelligent golden eyes, the more he wondered, was Ember just an animal, or something more? He pushed the thought away each time it surfaced. What mattered was that Ember was here, alive, and recovering. If there were answers to be found, they would come later. For now, Jax was content to share his quiet, lonely life with the extraordinary creature that had, against all odds, become his unlikely companion. A month after Jax found Ember, life in the settlement took an unexpected turn. The air, typically filled with the clamor of mining rigs and the distant hum of cargo ships, suddenly buzzed with tension. Word spread quickly. Several sleek, crimson-decked starcraft had landed outside the settlement's perimeter, accompanied by a retinue of armed soldiers. People who ventured too close reported that the soldiers bore the crest of the Crimson Rift, the mark of the Baroness herself. It was a symbol that sent a shiver through every settler who heard it. The Baroness wasn't just a local power. She was a ruler whose influence stretched across multiple systems. Tales of her ruthlessness were whispered on every mining station and cargo ship from here to the core worlds. When the Baroness showed up, it meant one of two things: a deal to be made or a punishment to be doled out. The settlers hoped for the former, but feared the latter. Jax was in the canyon, checking on the latest mineral yields, when the commotion began. He had spent most of his time in the wilds lately, partially to avoid too many questions about Ember. Over the past weeks, the creature had grown stronger, more energetic. It moved through his small living quarters with quiet confidence, always aware of Jax's movements. And though Jax wasn't sure if it was his imagination, he felt the faintest flickers of a deeper connection. Sometimes when Ember looked at him, it was as if it understood more than it should, as if it was trying to communicate in ways beyond simple body language. The bond between them had only grown stronger. But that morning, the sky above the canyon darkened with the silhouettes of descending craft. Jax watched as the starships circled before landing near the settlement. His stomach churned. Nothing good ever came from ships like those. By the time Jax returned to his habitat on the settlement's outskirts, the Baroness's soldiers had already fanned out. Neighbors stood in groups whispering. Some hurriedly packed belongings into crates, ready to run if things turned bad. The Baroness's reputation for swift and unrelenting justice was enough to make everyone wary. It didn't take long for Jax's door to echo with the heavy pounding of an armored gauntlet. He froze mid-step, his heart hammering. Ember, who had been resting in the corner, stood immediately, ears flicking toward the door. Before Jax could react, the soldiers forced their way inside. He raised his hands instinctively as three armed figures trained their weapons on him. They were clad in crimson-tinted armor, their faces obscured by opaque visors. Behind them, stepping into the doorway, was a woman whose very presence commanded attention. She was tall, poised, and dressed in flowing crimson robes that seemed to catch the light and shimmer like liquid fire. Her silver hair framed a face as sharp and elegant as a blade, and her piercing violet eyes cut through Jax as if reading his every thought. This was the Baroness. For a moment the room was silent save for the soft hum of the soldiers' weapons. Then the Baroness spoke, her voice low and cold. "You have something of mine." Her words sent a chill through Jax. He glanced at Ember, who was now standing tall, its golden eyes fixed on the intruders. The soldiers twitched nervously, but the Baroness raised a hand, halting them. "Is this the creature you found?" she asked, taking a step closer. "The one you healed?" Jax's throat was dry. He nodded. "I didn't know it was yours. I found it injured. I couldn't leave it to die." The Baroness studied him for a long moment. Her gaze shifted to Ember, who growled softly, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate in the air. The soldiers tensed again, but the Baroness merely raised an eyebrow. "You must understand," she said, turning back to Jax. "This is not just any creature. It is the pet of the Crimson Rift's ruler, a symbol of my domain. Its disappearance was unacceptable." Jax felt a spike of fear. "I swear I didn't know. I only—" "Silence," she cut him off, her voice sharp. "You speak as though you have done nothing wrong, and yet you kept my beast. You made it yours." Jax's hands were shaking now. "I didn't—" "Enough," she said, her tone final. She turned back to Ember, her expression softening. The beast's growl subsided as the Baroness approached, her hand outstretched. Ember sniffed at her fingers, then pressed its head against her palm. It was the first time Jax had seen the creature show anything close to submission. He couldn't help but feel a pang of loss. After a moment, the Baroness looked back at him. "You will explain to me exactly how you found it, every detail." Now, as the soldiers secured Ember, the creature let out a deep, throaty growl. Its golden eyes flicked between Jax and the Baroness. The sight stirred something in Jax, a gnawing feeling that this wasn't just about a pet being returned to its owner. There was something more behind the Baroness' piercing gaze, something calculated. He had the strange sensation that Ember knew it too. Jax cleared his throat, drawing the Baroness's attention. "Look, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just did what anyone would do." He cut himself off as her eyes bore into him. The intensity freezing the words in his throat. "Anyone would have left it to die," she said, her tone calm yet cutting. "You, however, made a different choice, one I would not have expected from a simple miner." She glanced at Ember, then back at Jax. "Tell me, why did you save it? Out of pity? Curiosity?" Jax hesitated. It just felt wrong to leave. It there, hurt and alone. I couldn't walk away. The Baroness studied him in silence, her expression unreadable. Then to his surprise she smiled. Cold and faint, but a smile nonetheless. "Compassion," she said softly, as if tasting the word. "How quaint." Jax's hands clenched at his sides. "I didn't know it was yours. If I had, I wouldn't—" "You wouldn't have what?" she interrupted, arching a silver brow. "Interfered, meddled in affairs beyond your understanding, saved something you had no right to touch?" Jax gritted his teeth but held his tongue. He could feel the tension in the room tightening, as if the soldiers were waiting for the order to strike. Ember growled again, louder this time, its tail lashing. The Baroness raised a hand, silencing both her soldiers and the beast. "Do not think my mercy is endless, miner," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in. This creature is more than a symbol. It is a connection, a bond that few ever experience. It represents power, loyalty, and trust. For you to have forged that bond, even unintentionally, speaks volumes about both you and it." Jax blinked. "I didn't forge anything. I just took care of it." The Baroness stepped closer, her violet eyes narrowing. "Yet it chose you. Do not think I haven't noticed. My beast, my Ember, has come to rely on you in ways it never should have. It should have rejected you, fled from you, yet it didn't. Why? I don't know," Jax admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just treated it like I would anyone who needed help." "Anyone," she echoed, her lips twisting into a smirk. "How noble." There was a long pause, the room heavy with tension. Jax felt Ember's gaze on him, saw its ears twitch as if it understood every word. Then the Baroness straightened, her demeanor shifting from predatory to regal. "You have caused a disruption in the balance of things, Jax Arlen, but I am not without my own sense of balance. You saved my creature's life, and for that I will grant you yours." Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "But," she continued, her voice hardening, "do not mistake this for kindness. I will take Ember back. It belongs to me as it always has, and you will forget you ever saw it. You will forget this moment, this meeting. If you speak of it, if you so much as hint at what transpired here today, I will ensure you regret it." The weight of her words settled heavily on him. He nodded, unable to speak. The Baroness turned to her soldiers and motioned for them to leave. As they began to file out, Ember hesitated, its golden eyes lingering on Jack's. It took a step toward him, rumbling low in its throat, almost as if it was saying goodbye. For the briefest of moments, the Baroness hesitated. She glanced back at Jack's, her expression inscrutable. "Consider yourself fortunate," she said, and then she was gone, her crimson robes trailing behind her as the door slid shut. Jax stood alone in the silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and relief. The air in the room felt heavier, without Ember's presence, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost more than just an extraordinary creature. He'd lost a connection, a bond he hadn't even fully understood until it was taken away. As he sat down heavily on the edge of his cot, Jax stared at the spot where Ember had been. In the end, he was left with nothing but memories of golden eyes and a warmth that had filled the cold spaces of his solitary existence. Memories and a question he couldn't stop asking himself. Why had the creature chosen him, even for a short time? And what would happen now that it was back in the hands of the Baroness?